Hi everybody, thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be sharing my February bullet journal setup with you. Normally when I start my layouts, I like to start with a dashboard. Now this is a dashboard that I created with my hand lettering in Procreate. So if you're interested in receiving this as a print, you can subscribe to my newsletter, and then the first of every month this guy will pop up in your inbox for free. So if you're interested, check it out. I'll link my blog down below. Now, also with that said, I create my lettering dashboard within Procreate. So I go through and I do color swatching to match my markers as closely as possible to the dashboard. So at the bottom right hand corner, you're going to see my swatching process. It's a bit of a lengthy process to make sure I'm getting the colors I want, but once that's done, my colors are decided for the rest of the month. So for this month, I decided that I would incorporate as much stamping as possible as a bit of a continuation from my last video where I showed you planner stamping basics and tips. I've linked that up in the cards for you so you can check that out. I'm using my Brilliance ink in my journal, and I actually ran into some issues with dry time. Now, my planner paper is coated, so what that means is the ink is sitting on top of the page for a lot longer, which means dry time is a lot longer. I will show you some tricks on how to get around that a little bit later in this video. But for right now, I was just trying to make do. I'm using the Sassy Club Wonder Woman stamps, and I will link that down below if you're interested. I also have a blog post where I'll be talking or revisiting all of the tips and tricks so that you don't have to keep going back to the video. Now what I'm doing is I am masking off the area around my letter. I decided my letter was lacking personality and a bit of dimension. So I ended up grabbing a stencil from Journal This Now and my Tim Holtz Distress ink, and just creating a bit of fun accent to the letter. What's great about this is that I'm able to go in and create that element throughout my layouts just to tie everything together into the theme, and not just with the blending of the ink but also just using the stencil to draw my stars. I'm cleaning off the top of the stencil because I wanted to actually use the back to create some continuity and fluidity with the image so that it didn't look like there was an obvious line where I had lifted up the stencil. And then I'll end up using those sticky notes for more masking or even for the Kanban board that I will be creating. The great thing about the polymer stamps is that you're able to see where you're going to lay the stamp down, and you're able to determine how you want it to look. Now I grab an extra piece of paper I have lying around. This is the first time that I use the stamp, and so what you're going to find is throughout the manufacturing process there might be a thin layer of film that gets deposited onto the stamped image. So by stamping it down for the first time on a clean sheet of paper, you're hopefully going to get rid of any issues with the stamp in terms of the film creating a lack of continuity. So once I did that, I was comfortable stamping it into my journal. If you've watched any of my videos by now, you know I like to add a border, and so you'll see me adding borders throughout. I ended up creating too thick of a border, so I grabbed a sheet of paper out the back of my journal and cut out what I needed and redid it. So it can be very daunting when you have a blank page staring back at you, but always know you can grab a sheet out the back of your planner, cut out what you need, and just to cover it up. You could also use whiteout. Whiteout does stand out a bit more, especially if your bullet journal is a bit more yellow. So by just tearing out an extra sheet out the back and using it to cover up any mistakes, it just doesn't make it as obvious. While I was coloring in the stamped image, I ran into ink transfer issues. So my Crayola Super Tip ended up picking up some of the planner ink or the stamp ink because it wasn't dry yet. And what's great about the Crayola inks is that they are water-based, and self-cleaning. So I was able just to draw on an extra sheet of paper just to clean the ink off of it. While I was coloring in, the ink ended up smudging. I started erasing it right away to lift off as much of the wet ink as possible, but some of the ink had dried. So I grabbed my Tombow Mono sand eraser, which was able to take off just a tiny thin layer of paper so that I was able to get rid of the worst of the smudging. When you use your Tombow Mono sand eraser, you want to be very careful. It will put a hole in your planner. And of course, any of the products I use, I will link down below for you. So if you're interested in grabbing any of it, you can check it out. My next layout I'm putting together is my monthly view. For my monthly view, I'm using my Studio L2E Labels Tabs Sentiments stamp set. They had the perfect size days of the week stamps, so I decided I would use those. I'm setting up my monthly view similar to how I did last month, where I had the smaller calendar, and then on the opposite page I had a content calendar. I'm not 100% sure it's working as great for me, but I thought I'd give it one more try before I moved on from it. Now I used my Crayola Super Tip as a highlighter just to add some color to the spread. I put the Crayola Super Tip down first and then stamped over top just to avoid having to wait for dry time and even then smudging the ink. I switched to my VersaFine ink since it does dry a little bit faster than the Brilliance. But again, you can check out my planner stamping video to see what ink is best for your planner in terms of ghosting and bleed through. On the bottom right hand side of the screen, you can see I have a Hampton Art Stamp Scrubbers cleaning pad. If you're going to invest money in your stamps, you want to make sure that you're going to look after them. So throughout the whole process, I'm cleaning them off and then putting them back. You can use a baby wipe, but you want to be careful because once it dries, it might leave a film on the stamp, which could create issues next time you use it in terms of quality of stamped image. I'm using the Studio L2E Simple Letters stamp set. This is a stamp set I've chosen to use throughout the month, so you'll keep seeing it pop up. The reason why I love this stamp set so much is that it has the two different sized alphabets, so you can have continuity when you do need smaller alphabet stamps. And another trick I would give you is make sure to write the word down that you're going to spell. I am notorious for forgetting letters. Even when I create my lettering layouts, if I don't have it written down, there's a high likelihood I'm going to forget letters. I definitely make sure to write it down. I also like writing it down so that I can determine the midpoint so that I can create a more balanced layout. As I mentioned before, I tried to stamp as much as possible, but I also wanted to add some calligraphy to just change it up a little bit and create a nice visual in terms of the balance between the two different alphabets. You'll see me use my Crayola as a highlighter again, just to mark off the weekends. Those tend to be our family times, so I want to make sure I'm not planning too much to do on those days. And then I'm going in and adding a border as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was having issues waiting for dry time with my stamped images. So what I ended up doing was another technique where I've spoken about it before on my blog, so I'll definitely link that for you in the comments. But I had some scrap sticker paper kicking around, so I stamped my images onto the sticker paper and then just fussy cut around it. This allowed for adequate dry time so that when I went in to color in my images, they were dry and there was no ink transfer or smudging. I ended up stamping all the images I'd need for the rest of the layouts I'll be creating. So once that was done and dry and cut out, it became super convenient moving forward. I wanted to include that video for you just so that you can see the process. My next layout I'm putting together is my February Doodle challenge. I wanted to make this special given that it is February, so I decided to do a self-care prompt list. Now this prompt list is specific to me and what I like. So when I made this as a printable for you, I decided to include a blank layout so that you can add your own self-care lists. I also included a blank layout in terms of not including the February so that you could use it as a core collection page that you can keep referring back to. And then of course I included my prompt list so that if you needed self-care ideas, if there are any ideas you don't like, you could just white out over top of it and throw your own ideas in there. But basically, I've been meaning to create this collection for a while, and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to do so. And I wanted to doodle it as well, so that it was just another fun element in the whole process. If you're interested in following along, please download if you want to, and you can tag me at natashamiller_creates on Instagram. And I'd love to see your self-care strategy that you use, and anything, maybe there's something in there that I see that triggers for me as something that'll work for me. And that's why I also wanted to share my list with you. So I don't include the list in the video, but you can check out my blog and the printable or Instagram for the list that I'll be using. I want to apologize for the headshots in this image. I was trying to line up my letters as best as I could without making it so that you had to stare at the back of my head for too long. For my next layout, I'm using the Kanban Board printable off my website just to speed up the situation. Initially, I thought I would be using this monthly, but after a month of using it, I realized I could set this up at the beginning of my journal and then just keep referring back to it. So when I move into my new bullet journal, that's exactly what I'll be doing. If you're curious about the Kanban method, you can check out my January setup video, which I've linked in the cards for you, and you can see what that's about. I also have a blog post about it, which I'll link below as well. I liked having the printable just so that I could then go in and add my own personal touches to it, including a Wonder Woman sticker. I also grabbed my stencil again to add more stars for continuity, and I actually grabbed some washi tape as well. When I do my washi tape swatching, it's very similar to how I do my pen swatching, in that I will hold my dashboard up and painstakingly sift through my washi collection to find washi tapes that'll work for me. My next layout is a brain dump layout. Now, I've tried to use these in the past and they didn't quite work for me, but I found that for January I could have really used one. So I decided to include one. I used my Amy Tangerine alphabet stamp set since it was a bit bigger. Since I was rushing, my stamped images weren't as clean, but another tip or trick is to fill it in with a black pen. So once this is dried, I'll go in with my mono drawing pen and just fill in where I had issues coming up with my stamped image. To add some personality to this page, I ended up going back in with my Holtz Distress ink just to blend in some color. If you're interested in seeing a color swatching video, I'll link it up in the cards for you as well. You can check out that video. What I ended up doing was I used a Crayola Super Tip to color in my stamped image, which acted as a stamp ink. The reason why you can do that is it's water-based, which means it cleans off easily, and so you're able to do that. And I didn't have a ink in the color that I wanted, which is why I ended up doing that. You could also use your Tombos, you could use your Artist Loft brush pens as well. I actually did a marker comparison, so I've linked that for you as well, so you can check that out if you're curious on a budget and want to see what you can afford and how it compares to other more expensive markers. And now we're creating my weekly layout. So I really loved my Alistair method from last month, and I really wanted to carry it over into February, but I wanted to create something a little bit different just to see how it works. So that's what you're seeing me create here. Now I did 7 blocks instead of the 8 that I would use. I've included both a 7-block layout and an 8-block layout for you. The reason why I wanted the 8-block layout is the first layout I used for my calendar. So I ended up having to combine my Saturday and Sunday into a weekend, which I don't like doing, but it is what it is. I've created it for you in case that's what you want to do, but then I've also done the 8-block layout so that you don't have to combine your weekends. You can keep it separately. Going forward for the rest of the month, I will definitely be keeping my Saturdays and Sundays separate. I've also included a long elongated square or rectangle for my next week. For my days of the week stamping, I'm using a stamp set from Feed Your Craft, which is linked down below. I found the days of the week to be the perfect size to fit into the blocks. Because I had to do a weekend, I ended up lettering that in as closely to the stamped days of the week as I could manage. And I also did that for my next week block. In the bigger block you see toward the bottom of the page, I'm going to be using that to record any positive things that happened throughout the week. Not so much a gratitude log, but just small wins for the week. I've left it blank so you can use it for gratitude, or you can use it for your next week recordings if you wanted to in the printable. And I actually included a habit tracker as well. I've mentioned in the past that habit trackers don't really work for me, but I definitely need to try something else to see if it'll work. So I'm hoping if it's staring at me throughout the week, I'm more inclined to use it. We'll see how it goes for the month of February. And again, if you're curious about the Alistair method, I do discuss it in my January setup video and in a blog post, which is linked down below along with the Kanban board. So please feel free to check that out. Thank you for watching today. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit through this. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below and I'd be more than happy to address them. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I can create more content for you as well as keep sharing my journal setups with you. So thank you so much.